How's it going? And welcome to the Real Intermediate Podcast. This is a special episode just because we have our first guest, Chris Cortez.
Woo!
She's
Yeah.
we have had a lot of cool adventures, but one of them is being able to invest in our first property together. So, Lara, you want to give us a little background and talk about how we all met?
Yeah. Well, first, I think I don't know if it was mentioned, but you two are co-owners of Able Real Estate Holdings. So I call you both real estate investors. You guys have had that company now for what, together like 2, 3 years now?
3 years since
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah, me and Esteban were insane and bought our first property basically a month after COVID hit. So,
Yeah, it took forever. But yeah, I just want to mention these are the two owners of I guess Emily and I were by marriage for Able Real Estate Holdings. But I actually met Chris because she was my coworker. And I remember meeting her at lunch and being like, this girl's pretty cool. And then just sort of like bringing her into my work friend group, and now it's like family, like we've gone to each other's weddings and like celebrated life events. But I think what's so cool is I don't think we each knew about our interest. Like Simon was talking to me a lot about real estate and like trying to like pitch it to me, and I wasn't really buying it. And then for whatever reason, I think Chris and I just started talking about what is that podcast?
Bigger
Real po
pockets.
Bigger pockets, and she was just like, your eyes lit up, Chris. And I think we ended up setting up a dinner between us and like ourselves, and then like your significant other, and that's how the conversation started. But it was like a work friendship that then turned into a business partnership. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And don't forget that we also honeymooned together.
Oh yeah.
We
Just
crashed
us
your
and
honeymoon.
my wife. No, no, we invited you guys for sure. But that was a lot of fun. And yeah, I think it started from House Call Pro, and me and Lauda met. And I mentioned it to a friend. They were like, oh, you should talk to Lauda. I think her and her husband are into that. Or I guess you were her boyfriend at the time. We've come
I
a
don't
long way.
even know. Yeah.
Yeah, we were dating. But yeah, we set up it. No, you know what? We were at a party, and I was like, "So Esteban, you're into real estate?" Or you asked me, and we started kind of talking a little bit more about it. And yeah, from there, I think we just shared our goals, our visions, our why. Right, that's really big in any real
Yeah.
estate. We were both, wanting to make the leap. I think both a little hesitant, both still learning. So it was cool to make that first jump with holding Esteban's hand because I think
Yeah.
we're like very different, you know.
Yeah.
Esteban, he is just like he researches everything. He dials in the numbers. He's very meticulous, and I am like, I feel like I'm more so. Uh, like a cheerleader. Like I can hype myself up to do
Yeah.
anything. I'm a big risk taker. So I'm always like, let's just do it and see how we land. And if we land on our face, we'll figure out how to get up. And if we land on our feet, then great. Like let's run, like what's
Yeah.
the next best step. So it was cool to put us together. I felt safe with Esteban.
Yeah.
And I feel like I didn't know it in the moment, but over time I realized just how much you have helped me through our partnership and how we do have a sort of synergy with our different qualities. Like,
Mhm.
I know you're always game for reaching out to strangers or talking to tenants, and that's stuff that I really don't like doing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'll handle like the taxes or the just financials or analyzing properties, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Chris, I also don't think we mentioned it. Like, Chris, you've had like years in tech sales. Like, how did you go from being, it sounds like some of those skills like kind of apply to when you dove into real estate, but like, how and when did the transition start for you of like, okay, I'm in sales, like, I have a steady paying job. Why even dive into real estate?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And if I can go back a little bit in my history, it was, from the time I graduated high school, it was, my goals changed. It was, I need to get a degree, right? That's what all successful people do and should do. And then after that, it was like, well, no, maybe I don't want to get into student loans because I'm not even sure what I'm passionate about,
Yeah.
right? If I'm going to get into debt with school, I don't have a passion. So how can I make money? And so that's how I got into tech sales. And that was awesome because I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. Um, and, after doing that for 5 years, it's a grind, and it was fun. But I think I just started realizing, that if I'm going down this path is long, and I'll have to
Hmm.
do it for the next 40 years until I'm 65, until I retire, a 40-hour work week. Like that just scared me. I was like, it scared the bejeebers out of me. So,
Yeah.
I asked this one question and I never forgot it because it was definitely a pivotal moment in my life. I asked, how do rich white guys become rich white
Hmm.
guys?
Hmm.
And, did a little digging, and it was pretty obvious kind of at the time, they either own a business, they get into stocks, or they own real estate.
Yeah.
And so a business, I don't know about that, not yet, maybe down the road. Stocks, I don't really understand. Like I can read about it, but the concepts kind of throw me off. And I researched, like real estate podcast, and Bigger Pockets came up.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love. Like I understood the concepts, the people they were interviewing, I related to their stories and their struggles and their vision and their goals, and, where they were now, making passive income, spending time with their family, traveling the world. Like that, I felt like those were my people, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just like all in on real estate at that point, just knowing that education comes first. So
Yeah.
that's really where I met you guys, when I was just learning.
Yeah. And it was like a really cool point because I think one, I was far behind the learning curve, even that you guys were on. Like, you guys were bought into the idea of there being more than like a corporate ladder, there being more to like, what does it look like to like retire early or build wealth? And I think I was still kind of working through, I don't know, like I love working. Like I could see myself working and like climbing up the ladder for years, like this seems fun to me. It's like
Yeah.
that's where I was at. But for you as Sivan, like similar to Chris, like what sparked that thought for you to go into real estate, going from being a software engineer?
Yeah, I think a big trigger for me was being told that my office is closing down in San Diego and having to
Yeah.
relocate. I feel like I see it as a blessing and a curse now, but at the time I was just freaking out, and I was like, I mean, what if this keeps happening down the road, if I keep losing my job, I'm never gonna feel safe.
Yeah.
And that's when I started looking online, and I found Bigger Pockets too, and just seeing real estate as an option to build wealth over time and being able to
Hmm.
have a stable foundation to just keep receiving passive income from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the interaction of all this is like, what is the word? Very serendipitous. It was like very lucky to like meet someone like-minded at the same time of the journey. But I also think something you mentioned, Chris, was like having a why and sharing that why with each other and being like, wait a second, our why is really similar. Like the reason why we're doing this is very similar. If you guys feel comfortable, like Chris, what was your why? Like the real reason behind just being like, I need to try this or I need to do this.
Yeah, and I think I have a couple. One is a
Yeah.
little bit more personal, in a sense that, being a woman, being Mexican, and being gay, you know, in theory, and actually, no, I don't even want to say in theory, in real life, that means that you just live a harder life, right? And,
Yeah.
you get discriminated against. Certain people don't like you just because of who you are, and you're in their space. So a lot of that was like, I was constantly battling with myself. It was, I felt like I needed to prove something
Mhm.
to the world, that someone like me can go out and be successful and whatever that might look
Yeah.
like. So it's like I wanted to represent all gay Mexican females, right? Um, so that was one big driver. And then also, I think, seeing my dad um, basically struggle. I felt like he struggled a lot in his life. He was an immigrant. He barely knew how to speak English. He had, four kids by the age of 27, and it
Yeah.
was sometimes hard for him to keep a job. And then he passed away early on a few years ago, so he never got to retire. And
Yeah.
that was a big motivation for me to change the dynamics in my family and change the way I live and the way my children live. Um, so those were huge drivers for me, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like family and like the sense of time can, like, to me, that's hitting me so hard these past 2 years of this urgency to do more so that I can spend time with my family. And it feels like a vicious cycle of like, I work so hard for my family, yet in working so hard, I don't get to spend time with them. And I'm banking on that they'll be there, or, and um I think for us both, family is a big why. Like, I
Mhm.
also seeing my parents financially struggle, lose their home during the recession. It was just like so much instability. And for me, I think I was like, I need to work and be in this corporate ladder because that can provide stability. And that's what I latched onto. But I really hadn't expanded my mindset into like, what could that be outside of that?
Do you think that losing the home when you were a kid was probably something that gave you a bad taste in your mouth regarding real estate?
It's a good question.
That's a good question, and I've never thought about that. If anything, I thought it was interesting. Like, my dad rented, it was like a pretty large home, and the goal for my dad had always been to build like an ADU and like part of it, and he was renting like the garage. So in a way, like, I saw it be a rental property in and of itself. Like, we had discussed doing this. Um, but no, I don't think it left a bad. Maybe it did. I think my mom had a complaint of like, why do we buy such a big house? And, like, we should have started out small and safe. So I, maybe in that sense, but I felt like I never had a forever home as a kid. Like, kids that have like a stable household and they live there their entire life. I moved like 6, 7 times by the time I was like in middle school. So, um, I don't think so. I think if anything, I just felt the peace and the weight lift off my parents' shoulders once they didn't have that financial burden. And that's more that feeling of safety and like peace is what I latched onto more than anything else.
And that is like the goal, right? To just like feel safe, feel like you're safe and secure wherever you are financially, especially if you're thinking about starting a family. And it's not until, like what Esteban said, it's not until
Yeah,
the rug gets pulled from under you, like your job lays you off, that you realize, like, oh my goodness, climbing the ladder or landing this amazing job, it's not always going to be my security blanket. It, you
yeah,
know, these companies go
yeah,
up and down, and I mean, we've seen it happen with a lot of big companies. I mean, you see what's happening right now with the tech industries. All these tech monsters they're
yeah,
underwater right now. So I would have
Yeah,
never guessed that a
lots of
couple years ago.
layoffs.
Yeah.
yeah. Especially in the tech space where I feel like we're all like, oh, we're pretty safe, like pretty comfortable. I I do want to touch on a subject. Like, I feel like you both had a really strong why and a really big passion. It was like, I know both of you separately, and you guys were like engulfed in it, like every podcast, every book. But then you had your partners, myself and Emily. How did you start that conversation, Chris, when it's not just you? Like, you're not diving into it alone. You kind of have to have your partner also buy into it. But like, how did you start those conversations with her? And what was the turning point where Emily was like, all right, I'm down for this too?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when you start kind of dreaming big or even outside the box, you question yourself, like, am I crazy? Can I do this? And
Yeah.
it's not until you take the steps and kind of write it down and start talking to people about it and start reaching out to see who else is in this, that you start kind of hyping yourself up and getting support. So with that said, I was really in my head about it. I thought, Emily's going to think I'm crazy. How do I break this to her? I was listening to Bigger Pockets, listening to episodes on how to get your spouse on board. And I think one day I came home from a run and I was hyped about it. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to talk to her about it. And I remember she was like, okay. It's one of those things where she was like, yeah, I mean, see where it goes. It sounds cool, but, you know, um, I think she was a little hesitant.
Yeah.
And so I think with my approach, my approach was to slowly send her like podcasts and book recommendations, but cherry picking which podcast I send to her, someone that maybe she can relate to,
Yeah.
like an interviewee that she could relate to. So um, we didn't combine incomes when we first bought the house in Texas. So that was initially all of my funds.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But like you said, now that we're married, what's mine is hers. So it was kind of easy at that point to take all my savings and kind of throw it in and not necessarily need to get like permission,
Yeah. Yeah.
at the time. But now she's totally on board and she loves it. She wants to go as fast as possible. So it just takes
Yeah.
time and just an understanding partner, I guess.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
I mean, I think, yeah, you put me through a lot of the same thing. Like, hey, let's listen to this podcast on this road trip. And I started getting a lot more interested. Yeah, I think you're like, for me, it was really similar. It was like, wow, like this person had a similar upbringing, or you start relating to the stories they're telling. And I was like, okay, like that's making a little bit more sense. Esteban, what was your strategy with me?
I would have wanted to do it even if you were upset, but I knew having you on board would have made things a lot nicer. So
Yeah,
I think at the time I had a lot of fear with just even taking the plunge to like do it. So I am very much an analytical person and just do as much research as I can. And part of that was just being so engulfed in all these podcasts. And I think it was good that I always played these podcasts because you ended up being engulfed into what I was learning. And
yeah,
slowly, I feel like it helped you also see the pros and cons of being in that space.
yeah. And you know what
Mhm.
I think really did it was when COVID hit, Chris and I were still at the same company, and my entire team got laid off except for me, like the team that I manage, 20 people. And I remember that it was exactly that feeling of instability. I was working from like 6 a.m. to like 7 p.m. I would get like a quick break. And it was just dealing with the madness of COVID and dealing with, holy shit, like the layoffs. And at that time in COVID, all the instability of the world. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know how much longer I can sustain this pace where I'm working like 12 to 16-hour days because I think I need to prove my worth. And that was like a separate problem in it of its own. But I was like, if I want to quit, I can't, like I help my parents out financially. I have my own bills to pay. And it just really got me thinking. It was like this feeling of dread. I was like, I can't quit. It felt like saying like I have no options. And I think Esteban had already put me in that environment where I was like listening to it, people saying, like I started real estate because I loved being around my kids, or I started real estate because like my wife had cancer and I needed additional income. And that's the moment that I think I sold myself of like, financial freedom means I can work the corporate ladder if I want to, but if one day it no longer serves me or my life takes a turn, I have the power to decide how I want to proceed. Where
Mhm.
at that moment in my life, I was like, I have no control of what it felt like. I have no control over what happens here. So I think it was like the snowball of information was already going, and then add COVID and the madness to it, I was like, all right, I'm in. Whatever it takes. And I'm a lot more like Chris, actually. I think this is why the partnership works, is because I'm like gun ho. When I'm bought in, it's full force. Like we're doing it. It's happening. I think Chris, you're one level above that where like you're even more hyped, more energy, like now. Um, but yeah, I think that was my turning point personally.
So l- let's talk about the property itself.
Oh
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah, I want to make it very clear that this property, this like highlight of our lives, was actually a nightmare for the first year or two. I guess it's only been 3 years, but like
Even
first
lately, it's been a
2 years,
nightmare.
a lot of
We've
lessons
just
learned.
recovered emotionally from all these issues we've had along the way.
Emotionally, financially, we
Yeah.
recovered. I mean,
You know what that reminds me of? Sorry, Tiger King, where he's like, I will never financially recover from this. Yeah.
it's so funny. It's so funny because we thought it was a safe investment. We're like, oh, this is a
Yeah.
tiny, like, we're like, oh, this is a duplex. It's half of a duplex. It's not that expensive. Doesn't look like it needs too much work. We had at the time we were working closely with my, I don't even know what to call him. Step uncle is like the best term I can think of.
Yeah.
Shout out to Daniel. And he had a lot of properties in Houston, Texas. So he had the general contractor, all the resources. He was going to be our partner at 50% and me and Esteban 25-25. So it felt like a really safe first move. We bought it from a wholesaler. If you don't know what a wholesaler is, how do you explain it in simplest terms? It's like
Someone who buys properties directly from the seller and then sells them right away to investors. I don't know if
For
investors.
that's
a
Yeah.
an
profit.
easy way to explain it, but
Yeah. I like wholesalers often refer to themselves as like the wild, wild west because they're not like real estate agents. They don't have to go through all the paperwork. There's not all the
Yeah.
security that agents give you. They're just kind of like a quick, like it's almost like the swap meet of real estate
Yes, that's
of properties.
that's a good way to put
So
it. Yeah.
you can get like a really great deal. You can come across a really kind of less expensive house.
yeah.
So you could turn a profit faster. So, anyways, we bought this house. I don't know if you guys want to go into numbers. I don't have the numbers, but we could probably ballpark them if you wanted to.
Yeah. Someone has him, I think.
Oh, I should have looked up the exact numbers, but I think the purchase price was 70,000, if around
I
there.
think, yeah, 70 to 80. And this was like this house was maybe what, 30 minutes from Houston,
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, north of Houston. So we bought it for 70, 80 cash. That's typically how you want to handle these properties. We initially thought it was going to be 10,000 in rehab cost. But 3 years later, what's that number closer to? It's maybe,
I I mean, just this year alone, it was like
yeah,
$16,000
Oh.
in
we're probably close to like
renovations.
35, 40K. I mean, everything that could have broke into pieces
Yeah.
all over the place. Like we had to do new HVAC, plumbing. We had to get rid of a tree.
Yeah.
I mean, you name it. It was insane. We
Yeah.
I
had
think
kind of intense.
before moving more into the like details of buying the house or like renovating, I want to talk a little bit about how it was right before we made the decision to purchase the property. So at the time, Daniel, he was kind of our way in. He was our Sherpa in the real estate
Yeah.
world. He buys properties in Texas, here, like everywhere. And at the time, he was sending us these opportunities to buy properties. And when I saw each one, I would crunch the numbers and I was like, oh, this doesn't seem safe. Like the numbers don't make sense to me. And it wasn't until I saw that half duplex that I was like, okay, like Chris mentioned, like we're partners, we're putting in a lot less money, and since this place is so tiny, it just made sense to do it. And my thought process at the time was if I'm going to take any risk, doing it with all these helping hands along the way, all these little pieces kind of lined up and made it easy for me to be able to have the threshold low enough to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and something I'm wondering is how was your mindset when you were at this point of the process? Because for me, it's always been like, I'm afraid, I'm afraid, I'm afraid. And then I have all these different reasons kind of making it easier to make the decision, and then I do it. But I'm curious to know what your thought process is like.
Yeah, for me, I was like eager, eager, eager. Like I would have pulled the trigger on anything. Like I was
Yeah.
so ready. But you know what? That's in a sense a lie because I had been in that mindset for so long, ready for like because we were kind of all over the place too, or where we wanted to buy. So we were trying to settle on certain details. I was ready to pull the trigger literally at any point. I was like, whatever. If I get rid of all of my savings, then that's fine. Like I'm sure I'm sure that's not going to be. I'm sure I'm not going to be underwater with this purchase. You know, I'll live and learn, and life goes on. But right before we bought the house, it was COVID, and my hours got cut in half. So
Hmm.
yeah, there was a little bit of fear there. But I was so committed to doing something that year. And also, you know, I learned through one of the, I'm telling you, I listened to Bigger Pockets like it was my Bible, right? So someone said when people are scared to do anything or buy something, that's the best time to buy it. And that no one wanted to
Yeah.
buy real estate at that point. So I also felt like, okay, this is probably a good time. Like we'll probably look back and think like this was a good idea.
Yeah.
So when Esteban said, yeah, this property looks great, I was ready to jump on board
Yeah.
and do what we needed to do.
I think, yeah, I think at the time you were always like, yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
And I was always like, no, 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 no. So I think it
Yeah.
was just perfect that we just aligned on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with you, Esteban, and I think you were like, I just like don't know. Every morning from like 5:30 to like 7:30, 2 hours a day, you would spend your time crunching the numbers. He'd like wake up, listen to a podcast, and like look at these spreadsheets from like narrowing it down. And I remember I was getting so impatient. I was like, look, I'm already bought in. That was the hardest part. And I was like, you just need to decide on something. I think for me, I get a lot of fatigue of, is it the right decision? And at that point, I remember being like, you and I both have jobs right now in COVID where shit just got crazy. Like, that's a blessing in and of itself, right? Two, we don't have kids. At that point, we didn't have a dog. I was like, and I think back to your question of like, how did my parents lose their home impact me? I was like, I've seen what it's like to lose your home. I've seen what felt like the worst thing happened, and I survived. Like,
Mhm.
so to me, I think having had experienced that sort of like financial loss also really lowers my threshold because I really was in the mindset of like, we can overcome it, right? Like, again, if you get rid of your savings, they're your savings, and we can get those back eventually. And then,
Mhm.
I think there's so much power in being like, I tried it, it wasn't for me, and I found out because I tried. So I feel like Esteban really needed us from both ends, Chris. I
Yeah.
think you just being that partner that was like, yes, I'm down, let's do it. And then
Yeah.
me in the background, like kind of pushing him. uh, so I don't think it maybe would have happened otherwise, or it would have taken a lot longer.
Totally. I
Yeah.
mean, fist bump on that. We both needed to just hoist Esteban up. Um, but yeah, and real estate especially, and that's why I like it. It's a very forgiving investment, right? And it's a safer one than most. So, you know, I knew it was going to be it was going to be okay at the end of the day, even if it was
Yeah.
a couple years later. And I mean, it just goes to show we thought it was a safe investment and it turned into not that. You know what?
Yeah.
It's good now, but it was a lot of lessons with that first house. So it just
Yeah.
goes to show, it might whatever it might seem like in the beginning doesn't necessarily mean it's going to pan out that way.
Yeah.
So
Okay, I loved this question in bigger pockets, but you're right. Like there was a ton of stress into that property. I feel like it took maybe like a year and a half of conversations before the purchase actually happened. And the process itself was really long. But how many months, or sorry, how much time after did you buy your second property
that's a good question.
after Treehouse?
I think I'm actually not sure. I want to say 6 months later,
Yeah,
6 to 8 months later.
yeah,
Um, it was, during COVID, and I was sick of being in my small apartment in San Diego with no AC, and it was 100 degrees out.
yeah,
And I wanted a new adventure, and I knew I wanted to invest in Louisville, Kentucky. I love this city so much, and it has so much potential. And I just thought, hey, let's go on an adventure. Let's go check out the market so I really know it like the back of my hand, and let's buy a house and flip it while we're stuck inside. So I
yeah,
think, yeah, that was like 6, 8 months later. And
yeah.
it was
It's the,
a personal loan as well. So we didn't do like
yeah.
real estate stuff. We actually went through an agent, and yeah, that
And
was a lot
Like
I
the
think
easier.
that's,
regular
The
method.
regular,
yeah,
yeah, route, which I recommend to most people
Yeah,
who are just starting out. Yeah.
yeah,
it's good that you bring that up, Laura, because I think we had been in research mode up until that point. We're just analyzing, learning, and once you get that first deal done, it gets so much easier to move on to the next one. And I think that's where I'm really thankful that you both nudged me enough to actually take the plunge because I feel like that's something that a lot of people can't even get across. Is there anything you would say to any people that are afraid to make that first jump and buy a property?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is the willingness to put yourself out there. And not, I don't mean just go and buy the property. I mean, put yourself out there, ask questions, figure out who around you is into what you're into. Um, Seek partnership, seek a mentor. Um, just get out there and meet people. I mean, I hate to
yeah,
say that it's all about networking, because it's not. You can do everything yourself. I think the road is going to be a little bit more bumpy. You're going to hit a lot of stop signs, a lot of issues that you may have overcome if you just ask somebody who's a little bit wiser, or who just has, um, just more years behind them. So I just say put yourself out there, kind of understand who's around you, and ask the right questions.
yeah, yeah. And kind of going back, Esteban, you didn't answer the question. So Chris got her property like 6, 8 months
Oh, yeah.
after, and then you, how long did it take after? Like
So
5, 6 months?
while it was while we were in escrow for the Texas property that uh well we were in escrow for that property for Treehouse for a really long time, but yeah, it was about 6 months or less. We bought in April
Yeah,
of the Texas property, and in September we bought the next one.
yeah. And I think that just speaks to like things that are unknown are super scary. And if you know yourself, like someone like Chris might jump into the deep end like all on her own. Like no one needs to push her off. She's like, I'm going by myself. But also, like knowing yourself and like building a support group. I think Chris, like you're saying, it's like network. To me, there's one thing that I've never really like jived with advice, which is like, oh, you got to keep everything to yourself. Like, you don't want to tell people like what your dreams are, like you don't really want to fill them in. And I don't think this friendship or relationship, partnership would have developed otherwise.
Hmm.
I'm a huge proponent and fan of, maybe some people are going to shut you down and they're going to say, like, wow, that's silly, and that's fine. They're not your people. But I think to close yourself off from just telling people about like what your dreams are and what you're hoping to do with your life, I think opens so many more opportunities. Um, so I always like am super appreciative of this partnership because it just came from a place of like, oh wow, like we share similar interests. On top of that, then we're like, oh wow, like we like each other as like a group of friends. Um, More so now we're like, Chris, now I'll call you like my annoying little sister, you're like family. So I think that just blossomed from being open and having one conversation. And I yeah, I think it's super important to, like you said, Esteban, like surround yourself with people who will like nudge you in a direction and push you when it's needed.
I couldn't agree more.
And I think another thing that this property has taught me is that things don't need to look perfect or seem perfect before you jump into it, because most of the time they won't even be close to what your expectations are.
Hmm.
And just getting that base hit is what
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah. At any point with all the costs that you guys were talking about with Treehouse, did you ever regret that decision? I know you guys are talking about like after 3 years, it's finally feeling like a little bit stable with that first property. Do you ever regret it?
No.
No, I don't regret it now, not at all. Like I said, with all the lessons, I feel more savvy after Treehouse. But I think for a while I was like, I blame Houston. I don't like Houston. I was so like salty about just the area. No offense to Houston. Houston's great. I just had my heart set on Louisville. So, I think it's like um, to go back to your question, don't regret it, but to kind of give some little insight, it's always good to have your head on a swivel too. Like I had two partners that were
Yeah,
in on Houston. I didn't want to do it alone, so sometimes you just have to put your put your pride down and just go with what you know what's being served to you. Or yeah.
yeah. Kind of going into like that was the first step, but what's the longer term vision for financial freedom? I won't say real estate, if it is that. I'm curious for you, Chris, like what are your next steps? You have what, three, four properties now?
We have four doors now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It feels good. This next year, we really want to, I really want to buy a quad. There's some great
Hmm.
quads in this area, and I want to do a successful burr. So that's really my goal. I'm, I made a new contact, a new mentor, if you will. He's a friend's brother, and he's big in the real estate game in this industry, and he's doing a lot for the neighborhood. And I just thought, man, this is the guy that I want to be like.
Yeah.
I want to have what he has. And like I said, it's all about putting yourself out there. So I sent him a text, said, let's meet for coffee. And we had an amazing conversation, and at the end of
Yeah.
it he was like, listen, like I have all the best contractors, so, and I trust them 100%, so I will give you all their information. And I think that was my biggest worry, like making sure I
Yeah.
have the right
Mhm.
contractors. So
Yeah.
that's our next goal in this coming year. We are having a baby, so I'm trying to
Yeah. Baby
um
Cortez.
yeah, I'm trying to mitigate the stress levels in the home. So I think that's our big goal for this year. Be, an introductory period for parenthood and then a quad. But for the next 5 years, the goal is to have 10K in passive income. So if something were to happen, if
Yeah.
we really wanted to take off for a year, we can.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
goal.
I think especially with like a baby is in like a coming baby, like is that changing your perspective of what's important to you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, um, I think it's more so just that they have security, financial security. And actually,
Yeah.
you know what? It's more just that if we want to spend time with the baby, if we want to take a year or two off, that we have that option.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the first 5 years are the most important, so I just want to be able to give that to us.
Yeah.
And then I'm also really excited for the motivation to come. I feel like I'm already
Yeah.
somewhat motivated, but
Yeah.
I know, you just hear that you get a fire under your ass after having kids. So I'm excited to
Yeah.
meet that version of Chris.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait. I don't know. I'm so excited. I'm just like happy for you both and your growing family, but I think also just like seeing how you grow out of this new stage of your life. Um, yeah. So, Esteban, same question. I'm just for the sake of today, I'm just pretend I don't know, but what are your long-term goals in terms of financial freedom or real estate? What is that looking like?
Yeah, I think long term, I just want to keep buying. I want to get to the quad. I think that would be a cool milestone because lately it's been duplexes, but um, another thing I want to try out is an Airbnb, maybe by like a national park or for travel nurses, which is something that I'll probably be asking you and Emily about. Like just how people find their travel nurse like locations to live in. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different routes that I would want to go down. I just don't want to stay stuck in analysis paralysis too long and get the ball
Yeah,
rolling. But
yeah. Well, I will say I think ever since we got that first one, it's been like a property or two every year. It's just your threshold is so much lower to take action. I think if anything, you're just like fired up. And then this week or last week, we were crunching the numbers, Esteban, and like to add up the income that comes out of those properties, it's like part of our salary now, it's like almost my close to like my old salary, knowing that in a year that will make as much as I did 5 years ago is kind of insane. So I think for me, I'm also starting to think about what do I want for out of my life. And I think seeing my parents get older, I'm like, I want to travel with them. I want to like show them places that they've never been to. And so I think that's definitely like the fuel under us. Esteban's dad is worked his entire life in the same job, and he literally can tell you to the day when he is going to retire. He's like 2 years, 3 months, 10 days.
Oh,
He's not joking though, right? And
oh, he's
so
excited.
for me, yeah, he's excited, and I'm like, how cool would it be to have the freedom to just like travel with them? So yeah, I think the fuel's still there, and now maybe is a time to take a little bit of a riskier opportunity than I think we would have been able to do like 3 years ago.
and I think we're also not far from a future where we'd have kids too. So I feel like that's an extra fire that
Yeah,
is kind of burning because we
yeah,
we do want that
Yeah,
freedom to be able to just spend that time with our kids. Like
yeah,
you mentioned, those
yeah,
first 5 years are like I don't know. It seems like that's the time that everyone wants to be around their kids. Uh,
yeah,
um, I guess after five too, but uh, yeah, it's just crucial years that you want to be for there for.
yeah.
totally. I think I'm pretty work hard, play hard. So we knew that,
Hmm.
we got a kid. We Emily got pregnant by IVF, right? So the past like year or two, it's super important that we just like lived our lives. Like me and
Yeah,
Emily had been, budgeting like crazy to buy these houses, and we were super hyper focused for, from like 2019 to like 2021. And the past couple years, we were really just like, hey, let's be hands off. Let's travel. Let's go to
yeah,
like expensive restaurants. Let's just like enjoy what we've done thus
yeah,
far. and then we'll get back to the real estate grind and obviously having a baby. So, it sounds like you guys are in a really good place. You guys have done like some amazing things with real estate, and I would just, I would say, play a little bit before doing
Yeah.
the pregnancy thing. Just like take it in, go travel for a hot minute, and then do the
Yeah.
baby stuff
Yeah.
because you
That's
guys
been
deserve.
the thank you. I appreciate that. And I think like that's such an important subject to me of I think Esteban and I have a hard time finding the balance of grinding and then having fun. I think I'm more open to having fun and like doing something like a treat yourself moment, where Esteban I think has just been in like a save, grind work. And so I've really been pushing him to, I mean, it's cliche and it's kind of a hard thing to say, but I'm like, we could die tomorrow. And if we saved up all these things, for what, you know? I think it's important to have like a line of sight of the future and a vision of the life that you have without forgetting like life is super fragile. And again, I think that's been like the biggest theme in my life is like losing both of my grandparents back to back. Monica from work, who was like such a great mentor to me. I'm so young. I was like, I can't get lost in the grind without remembering that the end goal of all of this is to like have more time and more freedom to like live life.
Mhm.
So that's also like one of my takeaways is like grind, but don't forget to like live as part of that process too. Yeah.
And there's a balance, right? And there's
Mm,
a macro, um, uh, macro and micro. Wait, yeah, micro and macro, right? So like work hard all week. I'm like a routine snob
yeah.
until Friday
Yeah.
night, and then I go and have fun for the weekend. And then usually I'm like a routine snob and like trying to save money because there's a trip planned in 3 months
No.
and I want to, kind of just buckle down for that. You want to take your parents to go to different countries or travel. I mean, that was definitely my goal for a long time, and I'm excited in about 3 weeks taking my mom to her first Europe trip. So
Yay!
I was really
Nice.
Ah, I love that.
yeah, it's kind of funny
Yeah.
though. As I get older, I'm like less inclined to want to go travel with friends or go to the clubs. Like,
Hmm.
I want to travel with my mom and go to museums. Like,
Yeah.
you'll really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So
I feel that in my soul. That's it. Like that just gave me so much like fuel right now because I'm like, that's exactly what I want to do. Like for my mom and my dad, it's like take them to Europe, take them to like a country they've never been and just like enjoy that time.
yeah, and I think a death in the family will really show you how important it is to live out your dreams now and spend the time now because, like
Yeah.
you said, we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So
Yeah.
finding a good balance is, I mean, that's my goal in life, to find balance.
Yeah. Stevan, any parting words from your side? Like takeaways?
Mm, I think that buying a property is really scary at first, but if you surround yourself with the right people and also just have the expectation that it's not going to go perfect, it makes things a lot easier. And also, just having that long term vision and goal will lower that threshold even more. So, I think this was kind of the perfect storm for us to be able to take those first steps. And I know that, like seeing all the things that we've talked about within this phone call, like Chris, you're going to do great. And I know that you're going to be killing it 1 year down the road, 5 years down the road, like I can see that fire in you and I know you're not going to stop. And it makes me really excited knowing that we are friends and like partners throughout this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to have met both of you guys. You guys inspire me a ton. You guys are the most disciplined people I have ever met. And you guys set your goals and you get them. And I just like commend you guys. And I just feel so honored that you guys have me on this podcast. Like,
Wow.
I was like in shock when you texted me, but I'm
Yeah.
happy to support in any way I can because I know you guys are there to support me, and I'm just
Yeah.
to anybody that wants to get into real estate, learn about it. Books, podcasts are a great way. I think education first, and feel free to reach out to me, Esteban or Laura. I'm sure any of us would be
Yeah.
happy to jump on a call with you guys and help you through it. It's all about
Yeah.
connections and just I think truly it is all about your connections, whether they're personal or
Yeah.
business. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately, like, that's the goal of this podcast. I think we're not selling anyone on real estate, but I think what I do want to kind of take away from this is that happened to be the path that we found, that you guys kind of bought into. For me, I don't know if real estate is my path, but like it is part of the trajectory that gets me to where I want to be. So I think for me, one takeaway is really think about the life that you want to live and what are your core values at the end of the day. If it's like family and spending quality time with those around you, you have to kind of work backwards from where you're at the moment to where you want to be. And real estate is just one of the multiple paths that you can take to get there. But yeah, I think it would be fun. You also have to be passionate about it. I hope that comes through, that you guys really had such like an appetite for consuming real estate enough to like bring your partners into it and like now turn it into something that's like part of your livelihood. But that might not be the path for everyone. And so it's just like explore, find what speaks to you, and then find people along the way who also find that similar interest. And I think you don't need to go further than that. Naturally, things progress from there because you're surrounding yourself by people who share that interest and that passion, and then will help support you in the way they can if they're the right fit. So yeah.
absolutely.
I love that. I think we still need to hammer out our details on how to close these episodes, but
Yeah.
uh, uh, yeah, we just wanted to say thanks, Chris, for hopping on this call, and I feel like we'll probably have calls in the future, just checking in on
Yeah.
each other just to see what we're up to. But
It's
Absolutely.
going to be called The Journey of Parenthood. And then we'll have Emily and Chris. And I'm like, how's it going?
That and maybe booking flights. You guys got to come to Louisville. We just bought a new bed, so our spare
Yeah.
room has a bed. We'll have your own bathroom. We'll make it all nice for you guys. Maybe put a little chocolate on your pillow.
Yay.
So I was so thanks you guys so much for getting me on this. This is really fun.